The imposter syndrome. Antidote: Stoic self-acceptance. Ever felt like you're just one mistake away from everyone discovering you're a fraud? That gnawing feeling that you don't deserve your achievements? That you've somehow fooled everyone around you? You're not alone. Millions of high achievers wake up every day battling the silent enemy called imposter syndrome. But here's the truth: most experts won't tell you. The answer isn't in more achievements or external validation. The ancient Stoics discovered something profound that modern psychology is only beginning to catch up with. What if I told you that accepting your true self, flaws and all, is the most powerful weapon against imposter syndrome? Not positive affirmations, not more credentials, but radical self-acceptance. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you how to use Stoic principles to silence that critical voice in your head once and for all. This isn't just philosophy. It's practical wisdom that will transform how you see yourself. 1. The dichotomy of control. Triangle: have you ever noticed how some days your confidence seems unshakable, while other days a single comment can send you spiraling into self-doubt? The difference isn't in your abilities, it's in what you're choosing to focus on. Today, I'm going to share something that completely changed how I view my imposter syndrome. For centuries, Stoic philosophers have talked about the importance of distinguishing between what we can and cannot control. But I want to take this ancient wisdom and transform it into something you can actually use every day. What if I told you that visualizing your situation as a triangle could instantly clarify why you're feeling like a fraud? Let me introduce you to the first of our 10 powerful tools: the dichotomy of control triangle. This isn't just philosophical theory. It's a practical tool that will immediately change how you experience imposter syndrome. Picture a triangle in your mind. At the top corner, we have your efforts, the work you put in, the hours you dedicate, the skills you're developing. On the bottom left, we have your self-judgment, how you talk to yourself, how you interpret your actions. And on the bottom right, we have outcomes and others' opinions, the results of your work, and what people think about you. Here's the breakthrough that will transform your relationship with imposter syndrome. Only 2 of these corners are actually within your control. You can control your efforts and your self-judgment, but you cannot control outcomes or others' opinions. When you're feeling like an imposter, take a moment to map exactly where that feeling is coming from. Is it because you're not putting in enough effort? That's fixable. Is it because you're judging yourself harshly? That's also within your power to change. Or is it because you're obsessing over outcomes you can't control or opinions you can't influence? Most imposter feelings live in that bottom right corner, the uncontrollable zone. We feel like frauds because we're attaching our self-worth to things we fundamentally cannot control. The antidote is to consciously redirect your focus to the 2 corners you can control. Try this exercise right now. Think about a recent situation where you felt like an imposter. Where on the triangle does that feeling belong? If it's in the uncontrollable corner, recognize that you're setting yourself up for anxiety. Instead, ask yourself, am I putting in my best effort? Am I judging myself fairly? By consciously mapping your imposter feelings onto this triangle, you create immediate clarity. You stop wasting emotional energy on things you can't control and redirect it to the areas where you actually have power. The dichotomy of control. Triangle isn't just a concept. It's a daily practice that will fundamentally change your relationship with self-doubt. Every time imposter syndrome strikes, visualize your triangle, map your feelings, and reclaim your power by focusing only on what you can control. 2. The reverse resume exercise. Think back to the last time you applied for a job, or scrolled through someone else's polished LinkedIn profile. What did you see? Achievements, successes, perfectly curated highlights that make everyone look like they've never failed. It's no wonder imposter syndrome thrives in this environment. We're constantly comparing our behind-the-scenes reality to everyone else's highlight reel. But what if I told you that deliberately focusing on your failures might be the key to overcoming imposter syndrome? It sounds counterintuitive, but this next technique has helped countless people break free from the prison of perfectionism. Let me introduce you to the second of our 10 powerful Stoic tools. The reverse resume exercise. This isn't just another self-help gimmick. It's a radical reframing that can permanently change how you view your setbacks. Here's how it works. Instead of creating a traditional resume that showcases only your successes, you're going to create what I call a failure resume. This document will detail all your setbacks, rejections, and mistakes. But here's the crucial part. For each failure, you'll apply the Stoic practice of reflection to extract the wisdom from that experience. Start by listing major rejections, jobs you didn't get, promotions that went to someone else, projects that fell apart. Be specific about what happened. Then add a section for mistakes you've made professionally or personally. Include times you've fallen short of your own expectations. Now comes the transformative part. For each entry, ask yourself these Stoic reflection questions. What did this experience teach me? How did it make me stronger? What virtue did it help me develop? What would I have never learned if everything had gone perfectly? The magic of this exercise is that it completely reframes your relationship with failure. Instead of seeing setbacks as evidence that you're a fraud, you begin to see them as essential parts of your growth. The Stoics understood that wisdom comes not from success, but from how we respond to difficulty. When you feel like an imposter, what you're really feeling is fear. Fear that your failures define you. Fear that you're not as competent as others believe. But your reverse resume proves otherwise. It shows that you're someone who has faced setbacks and emerged with greater wisdom. Keep your reverse resume somewhere private but accessible. Update it regularly. Review it when imposter syndrome strikes. Let it remind you that your failures don't expose you as a fraud. They reveal you as human. And more importantly, they show your capacity for growth and resilience. The people you admire most, the ones who seem immune to imposter syndrome, they've failed just as much as you have, probably more. The difference isn't in how often they fail, but in how they interpret those failures. With your reverse resume, you're building the same resilient mindset. This exercise isn't about dwelling on your mistakes. It's about extracting their value. It's about transforming shame into wisdom. And it's about accepting that your path, complete with all its detours and wrong turns, is exactly what has prepared you for where you are now. 3. The daily premeditatio fraudium. Have you ever noticed that the worst of imposter syndrome isn't actually being exposed as a fraud? It's the constant fear that you might be. That nagging worry that follows you into meetings, hovers over you as you work, and wakes you up at 3 a.m. It's exhausting because your mind is constantly playing defense against a threat that rarely materializes. What if I told you that there's a way to diffuse this fear before it even takes hold? A counterintuitive approach that ancient Stoics used to prepare for life's challenges, which we can adapt specifically for imposter syndrome? Let me introduce you to the third of our 10 powerful techniques, the daily premeditatio fraudium. This is a modern adaptation of the Stoic practice of negative visualization, tailored specifically to combat imposter syndrome. The name comes from the ancient Stoic exercise called premeditatio malorum, or premeditation of evils, where philosophers would imagine worst-case scenarios to reduce their fear and prepare their responses. Our version, premeditatio fraudium, or premeditation of fraudulence, applies this same principle to imposter syndrome. Here's how it works. Each morning, set aside 5 minutes for this exercise. During this time, you'll deliberately imagine specific ways your fraudulence might be exposed today. Maybe you'll blank during an important presentation. Perhaps a colleague will ask a question that reveals a gap in your knowledge. Or maybe your boss will finally realize you've been figuring things out as you go. Now, instead of just worrying about these scenarios, write them down. Be specific about what exactly might happen. Then, and this is the crucial part, rationally address each scenario. What would you actually do if it happened? What resources could you draw on? How likely is this scenario, really? And most importantly, would it actually prove you're a fraud, or just that you're human? The power of this practice is that it brings your vague, looming fears into the light of reason. When you examine them closely, you will find that most of your imposter fears fall into one of 3 categories. They're either highly unlikely, manageable if they do occur, or not actually proof of fraudulence at all. By practicing this daily fraudulence premeditation, you're essentially inoculating yourself against imposter syndrome. Just as a vaccine works by introducing a small amount of a pathogen to build immunity, this practice introduces small doses of your imposter fears to build psychological resilience. You'll notice something remarkable as you continue this practice. The scenarios that once filled you with dread begin to lose their power. You develop confidence not from the absence of challenges, but from knowing you can handle them when they arise. The daily premeditatio fraudium transforms imposter syndrome from a formless, lurking fear into specific scenarios that you can prepare for and address. It puts you back in control by changing your relationship with uncertainty. Instead of being paralyzed by what might go wrong, you become empowered by your readiness to respond. This Stoic practice isn't about dwelling on negativity. It's about freedom from fear. It's about facing your imposter syndrome head-on, rather than allowing it to ambush you throughout the day. And most importantly, it's about recognizing that being prepared for challenges doesn't make you a fraud. It makes you wise. The virtue-only feedback loop. Have you ever achieved something incredible? A promotion, an award, recognition from peers, and still felt like you didn't deserve it? Or worse, felt that it only raised expectations you couldn't possibly meet? This is the cruel irony of imposter syndrome. Even success doesn't silence it. In fact, for many of us, achievements only amplify that inner critic. Why does this happen? Because we're using the wrong measuring stick. We've been trained to evaluate ourselves based on external achievements and recognition, things we ultimately can't control. But what if there was another way to measure your worth and progress? One that imposter syndrome couldn't touch. Let me introduce you to the 4th of our 10 Stoic tools, the virtue-only feedback loop. This practice will completely transform how you evaluate yourself, creating a system where imposter syndrome simply cannot survive. At its core, this technique draws on the Stoic principle that true worth comes not from external achievements, but from the virtues you display. The ancient Stoics identified 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, making good decisions; courage, doing the right thing despite fear; justice, treating others fairly; and temperance, showing self-discipline. Here's how the virtue-only feedback loop works. After any significant event, a presentation, a project, a difficult conversation, you'll evaluate yourself solely on how well you embodied these 4 virtues. Not on the outcome, not on others' reactions, only on the qualities you displayed. Start by asking yourself questions like, Did I make decisions based on the best information available? Wisdom. Did I speak up when needed, even though it was difficult? Courage. Did I treat everyone involved with respect and fairness? Justice. Did I maintain appropriate boundaries and self-control? Temperance. The revolutionary aspect of this practice is that it creates a feedback loop completely within your control. You're no longer at the mercy of outcomes or others' opinions. Your sense of accomplishment comes from living according to your values, not from external validation. When you begin evaluating yourself this way, something remarkable happens. The power of imposter syndrome begins to fade. Why? Because imposter syndrome thrives on the gap between achievement and self-image. But when your self-image is built on virtues rather than achievements, that gap disappears. You can't be an imposter at being wise, courageous, just, or temperate. You either embody these qualities or you don't. And even when you fall short, the virtue-only feedback loop gives you clear direction for improvement. Focus on developing the virtue, not on chasing more external success. Try this approach for the next 2 weeks. After each workday, take 5 minutes to review your actions based solely on these 4 virtues. Notice how this shifts your focus from "What did I achieve?" to "Who am I becoming?" This is the perspective shift that dissolves imposter syndrome at its source. The beauty of the virtue-only feedback loop is that it doesn't ask you to lower your standards. In many ways, it raises them. But it places those standards in areas where growth is always possible, where comparison is irrelevant, and where your sense of worth is not dependent on luck or circumstances. This practice isn't about ignoring your achievements or avoiding striving for success. It's about finding a deeper, more reliable source of self-worth, one that no external circumstance can threaten and no imposter syndrome can undermine. 5. The cosmic perspective. Reset. Ever notice how imposter syndrome has perfect timing? It shows up right before your big presentation. It's there when you're about to share an idea in a meeting. It whispers in your ear as you're trying to make a crucial decision. And in those moments, your concerns feel absolutely overwhelming. Like the fate of the universe hangs in the balance. But what if I told you there's a way to instantly shrink those feelings down to size? A mental shift so powerful that it can transform paralyzing anxiety into liberating perspective in just moments? Let me introduce you to the 5th of our 10 powerful Stoic techniques, the cosmic perspective reset. This practice draws on the Stoic exercise called view from above, but tailored specifically to combat imposter syndrome when it strikes hardest. Here's the reality. Most of our imposter fears seem monumental because we're viewing them through a microscope rather than a telescope. We're zoomed in so close that a single mistake or moment of uncertainty fills our entire field of vision. The cosmic perspective. Reset is about deliberately zooming out, way out, to see your situation from an almost cosmic vantage point. Here's how it works. When imposter syndrome hits, take a deep breath and guide yourself through these 3 stages of perspective. First, zoom out to the scale of your entire life. Will this presentation, this meeting, this project still matter in 5 years? What about 20 years? From the perspective of your entire life journey, how significant is this single moment? Next, zoom out to the scale of humanity. Across the globe, billions of people are living their lives, facing challenges, experiencing joy and sorrow. Many are dealing with imposter syndrome just like you. Your experience is of the shared human condition, not a personal failing. Finally, zoom out to the cosmic scale. Consider the vast universe, billions of years old, containing countless galaxies. From this perspective, even the greatest human achievements are tiny ripples in an infinite ocean. And yet, each ripple still matters in its own perfect way. This isn't about minimizing your work or saying it doesn't matter. Rather, it's about putting it in proper perspective. When you realize that your imposter fears are tiny specks in the grand scheme of existence, they lose their chokehold on your confidence. The cosmic perspective, reset, doesn't diminish the importance of doing good work. It frees you to do that work without the crushing weight of imposter syndrome. It reminds you that you're a human being having a normal human experience, not a fraud about to be exposed. Next time imposter syndrome strikes, try this. Place your hand on your heart, take a deep breath, and mentally guide yourself through these expanding circles of perspective. Feel the anxiety begin to dissolve as you, not on the outcome, not on others' reactions, only on the qualities you displayed. Start by asking yourself questions like, did I make decisions based on the best information available? Wisdom. Did I speak up when needed, even though it was difficult? Courage. Did I treat everyone involved with respect and fairness? Justice. Did I maintain appropriate boundaries and self-control? Temperance. The revolutionary aspect of this practice is that it creates a feedback loop completely within your control. You're no longer at the mercy of outcomes or others' opinions. Your sense of accomplishment comes from living according to your values, not from external validation. When you begin evaluating yourself this way, something remarkable happens. The power of imposter syndrome begins to fade. Why? Because imposter syndrome thrives on the gap between achievement and self-image. But when your self-image is built on virtues rather than achievements, that gap disappears. You can't be an imposter at being wise, courageous, just, or temperate. You either embody these qualities or you don't. And even when you fall short, the virtue-only feedback loop gives you clear direction for improvement. Focus on developing the virtue, not on chasing more external success. Try this approach for the next 2 weeks. After each workday, take 5 minutes to review your actions based solely on these 4 virtues. Notice how this shifts your focus from "what did I achieve?" to "who am I becoming?" This is the perspective shift that dissolves imposter syndrome at its source. The beauty of the virtue-only feedback loop is that it doesn't ask you to lower your standards. In many ways, it raises them. But it places those standards in areas where growth is always possible, where comparison is irrelevant, and where your sense of worth is not dependent on luck or circumstances. This practice isn't about ignoring your achievements or avoiding striving for success. It's about finding a deeper, more reliable source of self-worth, one that no external circumstance can threaten and no imposter syndrome can undermine. 5. The cosmic perspective. Reset. Ever notice how imposter syndrome has perfect timing? It shows up right before your big presentation. It's there when you're about to share an idea in a meeting. It whispers in your ear as you're trying to make a crucial decision. And in those moments, your concerns feel absolutely overwhelming. Like the fate of the universe hangs in the balance. But what if I told you there's a way to instantly shrink those feelings down to size? A mental shift so powerful that it can transform paralyzing anxiety into liberating perspective in just moments? Let me introduce you to the 5th of our 10 powerful Stoic techniques, the cosmic perspective reset. This practice draws on the Stoic exercise called view from above, but tailored specifically to combat imposter syndrome when it strikes hardest. Here's the reality. Most of our imposter fears seem monumental because we're viewing them through a microscope rather than a telescope. We're zoomed in so close that a single mistake or moment of uncertainty fills our entire field of vision. The cosmic perspective. Reset is about deliberately zooming out, way out, to see your situation from an almost cosmic vantage point. Here's how it works. When imposter syndrome hits, take a deep breath and guide yourself through these 3 stages of perspective. First, zoom out to the scale of your entire life. Will this presentation, this meeting, this project still matter in 5 years? What about 20 years? From the perspective of your entire life journey, how significant is this single moment? Next, zoom out to the scale of humanity. Across the globe, billions of people are living their lives, facing challenges, experiencing joy and sorrow. Many are dealing with imposter syndrome just like you. Your experience is of the shared human condition, not a personal failing. Finally, zoom out to the cosmic scale. Consider the vast universe, billions of years old, containing countless galaxies. From this perspective, even the greatest human achievements are tiny ripples in an infinite ocean. And yet, each ripple still matters in its own perfect way. This isn't about minimizing your work or saying it doesn't matter. Rather, it's about putting it in proper perspective. When you realize that your imposter fears are tiny specks in the grand scheme of existence, they lose their chokehold on your confidence. The cosmic perspective. Reset doesn't diminish the importance of doing good work. It frees you to do that work without the crushing weight of imposter syndrome. It reminds you that you're a human being having a normal human experience, not a fraud about to be exposed. Next time imposter syndrome strikes, try this. Place your hand on your heart, take a deep breath, and mentally guide yourself through these expanding circles of perspective. Feel the anxiety begin to dissolve as you recognize the true scale of your concerns. The Stoics practiced this cosmic viewing not to escape responsibility, but to fulfill it with greater clarity and peace. When you see your work from this expanded perspective, you're able to contribute not from a place of fear, but from a place of purpose. The beauty of the cosmic perspective reset is that it's always available to you. In any moment, with just a few breaths, you can shift from the suffocating grip of imposter syndrome to the liberating embrace of cosmic perspective. This isn't escapism, it's wisdom. It's not denying reality, it's seeing a more complete reality. 6. The memento communis practice. There's something particularly isolating about imposter syndrome. When you're in its grip, you look around and see only capable, confident people who have it all figured out. Meanwhile, you're certain you're the only one secretly struggling, the only fraud who somehow slipped through the cracks. This feeling of being alone in your struggles is one of imposter syndrome's most powerful weapons. But what if I told you that nearly every person you admire has felt exactly the same way? What if you knew that the most accomplished people in history, brilliant scientists, visionary leaders, groundbreaking artists, have all wrestled with the very same doubts that plague you? Let me introduce you to the 6th of our 10 powerful Stoic techniques, the memento communis practice. The name comes from Latin for remember the community, or remember what we have in common. And it's a practice that will transform how you view your imposter syndrome. Here's how it works. You're going to create a personal collection of stories from admired figures who have openly discussed their battles with imposter syndrome. This collection becomes your reminder that these feelings aren't evidence of fraud. They're evidence of your membership in a remarkable community of strivers and achievers. Start by researching imposter syndrome experiences from people you respect in your field. You'll be astonished at who turns up. Maya Angelou worried that someone would expose her as a fraud despite writing 11 books. Neil Armstrong felt unworthy of his historic moon landing. Einstein feared he didn't deserve his acclaim. These aren't just random examples. Nearly every field is filled with accomplished people who've felt exactly as you do now. Collect these stories in a format that works for you: a digital document, a physical journal, even an audio recording. Include direct quotes where possible. Update this collection regularly as you discover new examples. The key is making it easily accessible when imposter syndrome strikes. When you're feeling like a fraud, open your Memento Communis collection. Read the words of people you admire, describing the same feelings you're experiencing. Remember that you're not alone. You're of a community that includes the very people whose achievements inspire you. This practice works because it directly counters one of imposter syndrome's core lies: that your self-doubt is unique and revealing of your inadequacy. The truth is exactly the opposite. Your self-doubt connects you to virtually every person who has ever pushed their boundaries or stepped into growth. The Memento Communis doesn't just provide comfort, it offers perspective. When you see that imposter syndrome is common among high achievers, you begin to recognize it not as a warning sign, but as a companion on the path of growth. Some even come to view it as evidence they're pushing themselves appropriately. Make this practice a regular of your imposter syndrome toolkit. Review your collection weekly, not just when you're struggling. Update it as you discover new stories. Share it with colleagues who might be fighting their own battles with self-doubt. By building this living testament to the universality of imposter feelings, you create a powerful reminder that you're not exposed as an imposter by your doubts. You're revealed as human. And in that shared humanity comes not just comfort, but strength to continue growing despite the discomfort of uncertainty. 7. The Sage's Mirror Technique. We all have that voice inside our head, the one that never seems to take a day off. For many of us dealing with imposter syndrome, that inner voice is our harshest critic. It notices every mistake, predicts every failure, and keeps a perfect record of our shortcomings. But have you ever stopped to consider how you'd feel if someone spoke to your best friend the way you speak to yourself? The truth is, many of us would never tolerate someone else speaking to a loved one the way we routinely speak to ourselves. This disconnect reveals something important about imposter syndrome. It often thrives on a double standard we've created without even realizing it. Let me introduce you to the 7th of our 10 powerful Stoic tools, the Sage's Mirror Technique. This practice draws on the Stoic concept of the sage, the ideally wise person, and uses it to transform your inner dialogue. Here's how it works. The next time negative self-talk strikes, when you're feeling like a fraud or beating yourself up over a mistake, pause and ask this simple but powerful question. Would I say this to someone I deeply respect? Imagine someone you genuinely admire facing the exact same situation you're in. Perhaps it's a mentor who has guided you, a friend whose wisdom you trust, or even a historical figure like Marcus Aurelius himself. What would you say to them? What advice would you offer? What perspective would you share? The gap between how you talk to yourself and how you would talk to someone you respect reveals the irrationality in your self-criticism. The Stoics prized rationality above all else, and there's nothing rational about holding yourself to standards you wouldn't apply to others. This technique isn't about letting yourself off the hook. It's about applying the same fair, balanced perspective to yourself that you naturally offer others. It's about recognizing that true self-assessment requires the same wisdom and compassion you'd use when assessing someone else. Try this approach the next time imposter syndrome flares up. When that critical inner voice says, "You're not qualified for this project," ask yourself, would I say this to my respected colleague facing the same challenge? The answer is almost always no. You'd likely focus on their strengths, remind them of past successes, and offer encouragement for the road ahead. The power of the sage's mirror technique is that it doesn't just make you feel better. It actually makes your self-assessment more accurate. Research shows that excessive self-criticism distorts our perception, causing us to overestimate our flaws and underestimate our capabilities. By applying the same balanced perspective to yourself that you'd offer others, you're actually seeing yourself more clearly. Make this a regular practice. Whenever you catch yourself in harsh self-criticism, pause and reflect. Is this how I would speak to someone I respect? If not, consciously rephrase your thought with the same fairness and wisdom you'd offer another. Over time, this practice creates a profound shift. Your inner dialogue gradually transforms from that of a harsh critic to that of a wise mentor. You begin to view your challenges and shortcomings not as evidence of fraudulence, but as natural parts of growth, just as you would for someone else. The sage's mirror technique embodies the Stoic virtue of justice, treating yourself with the same fairness you extend to others. And in that balanced perspective, imposter syndrome finds much less fertile ground to grow. 8. The unconditional self-worth declaration. Have you ever noticed how quickly your confidence can crumble after a single setback? One moment you feel capable and worthy, and the next, after one criticism or mistake, you're questioning your entire value as a person. This roller coaster happens because, for many of us, our sense of worth is completely tangled up with our achievements and others' approval. And that's exactly where imposter syndrome finds its power. But what if your sense of worth wasn't dependent on your latest accomplishment or someone else's validation? What if you had an unshakable foundation that imposter syndrome couldn't touch? Let me introduce you to the 8th of our 10 powerful Stoic techniques, the unconditional self-worth declaration. This practice draws directly from Stoic philosophy's radical idea that human worth is inherent, not earned, and it has the power to fundamentally change your relationship with imposter syndrome. At its core, this technique is about creating a personal declaration that explicitly separates your intrinsic value from your external achievements. It's a written statement that serves as your touchstone when imposter syndrome tries to convince you that your worth depends on your performance. Here's how to create your declaration. Set aside 30 minutes of uninterrupted time. Begin by reflecting on the Stoic principle that human worth comes from our capacity for virtue and reason, qualities we all possess regardless of external success. Then, draft a personal statement that affirms your inherent dignity and worth, independent of achievements, roles, or others' opinions. Your declaration might include statements like, "My worth as a human being is complete and unchangeable, regardless of my successes or failures. I am valuable not primarily for what I achieve, but for who I am. My dignity isn't earned through accomplishments. It's inherent in my humanity." Make this declaration personal and specific to your situation. Include the particular achievements you tend to tie your worth to, and explicitly separate them from your fundamental value. If you struggle with professional success, your declaration might state, "My worth is not determined by my career advancement, salary, or professional recognition." Once you've created your declaration, refine it until it resonates deeply with you. Then, commit it to memory. Display it where you'll see it daily, and, most importantly, practice returning to it whenever imposter syndrome strikes. The power of this practice comes from repetition and internalization. Each time you feel like a fraud, consciously recall your declaration. Remind yourself that even if the worst of your imposter fears came true, even if you made a mistake or didn't meet expectations, your fundamental worth remains completely intact. This isn't about lowering your standards or not caring about your performance. You can still strive for excellence while recognizing that your excellence doesn't determine your value. As the Stoics understood, this separation actually enables greater achievement by freeing you from the paralyzing fear of failure. With regular practice, you'll notice something profound. When your sense of worth is no longer riding on each performance, you actually perform better. You take more worthwhile risks. You learn more readily from mistakes. You bring more authenticity to your work. All because you're no longer working under the crushing pressure of proving your worth. The unconditional self-worth declaration isn't just a statement. It's a new operating system for your self-concept. It replaces the conditional worth model that feeds imposter syndrome with an unconditional worth model that starves it. And in doing so, it frees you to pursue excellence, not from fear, but from a place of security and purpose. 9. The rational self-dialogue method. We've all experienced that moment. You're about to speak up in a meeting, submit an important project, or take on a new challenge, when suddenly that familiar voice pipes up. Who do you think you are? You're going to embarrass yourself. Everyone's going to find out you don't belong here. And before you know it, you're spiraling into full-blown imposter syndrome. What makes this inner critic so powerful isn't just what it says, but how we respond to it. Most of us either try to silence it, which rarely works, or we accept its accusations without question, which feels terrible. But what if there was a third option? A way to engage with that critical voice that neither suppresses it nor surrenders to it. Let me introduce you to the 9th of our 10 powerful Stoic techniques, the rational self-dialogue method. This practice draws on the Stoic tradition of rational examination and transforms your internal monologue into a constructive dialogue. Here's how it works. When your imposter voice starts criticizing you, instead of trying to shut it down or believing it outright, you're going to engage it in a Socratic dialogue. You'll literally write out this exchange between two parts of yourself, your imposter voice and your rational self. Start by writing down exactly what your imposter voice is saying. Don't soften it. Capture its accusations in full force. You're completely unprepared for this presentation. Everyone will see you don't know what you're talking about. Then, respond as your rational self, applying Stoic principles of evidence and reason. Don't just offer bland reassurances. Ask probing questions and examine the evidence. What specific parts am I unprepared for? What's the evidence that I don't know what I'm talking about? Have I successfully handled similar situations in the past? Continue this written dialogue, letting your imposter voice respond, and then countering again with your rational self. The key is to treat your imposter voice not as an enemy to be silenced, but as a misguided of yourself that needs correction through reason. As you practice this method, you'll notice your rational self becoming stronger and quicker to respond. You'll develop the ability to question imposter thoughts automatically. Is this thought based on evidence or emotion? Is this a reasonable assessment or catastrophizing? What would be a more balanced perspective? What makes this technique so powerful is that it doesn't ask you to ignore your concerns, it teaches you to examine them rigorously. This honors the Stoic commitment to truth, while preventing emotional reasoning from hijacking your confidence. You can practice this method in different ways, depending on the situation. When you have time, write out the full dialogue in a journal. In the moment, you might just jot quick notes on your phone. Eventually, you'll internalize the process so well that you can run through this rational dialogue mentally in real time. The rational self-dialogue method works because it directly counters one of imposter syndrome's most effective weapons, unchallenged assumptions. When we leave our imposter thoughts unexamined, they seem authoritative and true. But when subjected to rational scrutiny, they often reveal themselves as distorted, exaggerated, or simply false. This practice isn't about convincing yourself you're perfect. It's about arriving at a fair, evidence-based assessment of your abilities and challenges. It's about replacing emotional reasoning with the kind of rational self-assessment the Stoics valued so highly. By transforming your critical inner monologue into a rational dialogue, you create internal space for wisdom to emerge. And in that space, imposter syndrome loses its power to define your reality or limit your potential. 10. The legacy perspective. Shift. Have you ever noticed how imposter syndrome seems to vanish when you're helping someone else? When you're mentoring a colleague or teaching a skill to a friend, that nagging sense of inadequacy often disappears completely. This isn't coincidental. It reveals something profound about the nature of imposter syndrome and points us toward one of its most powerful antidotes. The truth is, imposter syndrome thrives when we're focused inward, on our own status, validation, and worth. But it struggles to survive when our focus shifts outward, to the value we're creating and the difference we're making for others. Let me introduce you to the 10th and final of our Stoic techniques, the legacy perspective shift. This practice will fundamentally transform how you view your work and yourself, addressing imposter syndrome at its very foundation. At its core, this technique is about reimagining your work through the lens of contribution rather than validation. It's about asking not, "How will this make me look?" but, "How will this help others?" Not, "Will they think I'm good enough?" but, "What value am I adding here?" Here's how to practice the legacy perspective shift. Before beginning any work that triggers your imposter syndrome, take a moment to explicitly identify who will benefit from your efforts and how. Be specific about the value you're creating, the problems you're solving, or the needs you're meeting. This might sound simple, but its effect is profound. When you consciously frame your work as contribution rather than performance, you activate different psychological processes. Instead of the anxiety of self-evaluation, you experience the purpose of service. Instead of fearing judgment, you focus on impact. The Stoics understood this principle deeply. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What benefits the hive benefits the bee." They recognized that true fulfillment comes not from accolades or status, but from contributing to something larger than ourselves. This perspective shift is particularly powerful for imposter syndrome because it directs your attention away from the very questions that fuel your self-doubt. When you're focused on the value you're adding, questions like, "Do I belong here?" or "Am I good enough?" become far less relevant than, "How can I best contribute?" Try this approach with your next project or challenge. Before starting, write down, "The value I'm creating here is," and "the people who will benefit from this are." Keep this statement visible as you work. Return to it whenever imposter thoughts arise. Over time, begin to expand your legacy perspective beyond immediate contributions to your longer-term impact. Ask yourself, how might my work today contribute to something meaningful years from now? What legacy am I building with my daily efforts? This doesn't mean ignoring skill development or areas for improvement. Rather, it means approaching growth itself through the lens of increased contribution rather than increased validation. You learn and improve not to prove your worth, but to enhance your impact. The legacy perspective shift doesn't just alleviate imposter syndrome, it transforms it into a catalyst for meaningful work. When your focus shifts from validation to contribution, moments of self-doubt become opportunities to recommit to the value you're creating. This final technique completes our Stoic toolkit by addressing the deepest root of imposter syndrome. The mistaken belief that our worth comes from validation rather than contribution. By shifting your perspective from what you can gain to what you can give, you not only silence imposter syndrome, but discover a more fulfilling relationship with your work. Conclusion. We've journeyed together through 10 powerful Stoic practices, each targeting imposter syndrome from a different angle. From mapping your feelings on the dichotomy of control triangle to embracing your failures in the reverse resume exercise, from preparing for challenges with the daily premeditatio fraudium to evaluating yourself through the virtue-only feedback loop, each of these tools offers a unique pathway to freedom from self-doubt. The beauty of these Stoic practices is that they don't ask you to deny reality or pretend you're perfect. Instead, they invite you to see yourself more clearly, judge yourself more fairly, and focus on what truly matters. They replace the distorted lens of imposter syndrome with the clear vision of Stoic wisdom. Remember that overcoming imposter syndrome isn't about never feeling doubt again. It's about not being controlled by that doubt. It's about developing a relationship with uncertainty that empowers rather than paralyzes you. The ancient Stoics knew this well. True confidence isn't the absence of challenge, but the capacity to face challenge with courage and wisdom. As you implement these practices in your life, be patient with yourself. Start with the one that resonates most strongly and build from there. With consistent practice, you'll find that imposter syndrome loosens its grip, allowing you to bring your full self to your work and life. The ultimate Stoic antidote to imposter syndrome is this: self-acceptance not based on perfection, but on